All right, guys, we are in chapter 2. We're going to be looking at the Mediterranean and the Middle East. All right, so first we're going to be looking at the cosmopolitan Middle East. So what does cosmopolitan mean? Essentially how I look at it, it's a mesh of cultures, it's a mesh of ideas all in one place. And since the Middle East was really the first area where many civilizations sprung up and advanced, it's natural that this progression took place. So let's look at Western Asia first. In the southern portion of Western Asia, you had the Kassites, Kassites. They ruled Babylonia during this period. Babylonia did not pursue territorial conquest, unlike other areas. In the north, the Assyrians had their origins in northern Tigris area. They were involved in trade in tin and silver. Then you had the Hittites, which are Hittites, had their capital in Anatolia. They used horse-drawn chariots and had access to important copper, silver, and iron deposits. During the second millennium B.C.E., Mesopotamian political and cultural concepts spread across much of Western Asia. Then you have the New Kingdom Egypt. The New Kingdom period was preceded by the decline of the Middle Kingdom and by the subsequent period of rule by the non-Egyptian Hyksos, which are Hyksos. A native Egyptian dynasty overthrew the Hyksos to begin the New Kingdom period. This period was characterized by aggressive expansion into Syria, Palestine, and into Nubia. Innovations during the New Kingdom period include Queen Hatshepsut's attempt to open direct rule or direct trade with Punt and the Achaemenids, construction of a new capital in Amarna. The Achaemen also made Aten the supreme deity of Egypt and carried out controversial reform program. When the Ramessides seized power, they renewed the policy of conquest and expansion neglected by the Achaemenids. The greatest king, Ramses II, ruled for 66 years. Let's move down to commerce and communication. The Syrian Palestine area was an important crossroads for trade in metals. For this reason, the Egyptians and the Hittites fought battles and negotiated territorial agreements concerning control over the Syrian Palestine area. Access to metals was vital to the all Bronze Age states. But metals, including copper and tin for bronze, often had to be obtained from faraway places. The demand for metal spurred the development of trade in copper from the Anatolia and Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan and Cornwall, silver from the Anatolia, and gold from Nubia. New modes of transportation were introduced during this period, included horses, chariots, and camels. This is just a good chart a slide showing you exactly what just to help kind of make it a little bit easier for you to remember. This is a great map showing you the different empires that we're talking about, the Hittite, the Mesopotamian, and the Egyptian, where their cultures were at. All right, so let's look at the Minoan Crete and the Mycenaean Greeks. The Minoan civilization is known through legendary accounts of King Minos, the labyrinth because of the labyrinth beneath his palace and the Minotaur. Archaeological evidence for Minoan civilization includes excavated palace sites at Knossos, Phaseos, and Malea, and widely distributed remains of the Cretan pottery and artifacts. The evidence suggests that Minoan civilization was influenced by the civilizations of Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. Minoan civilization was destroyed probably by the Mycenaean Greeks about 1450 BCE. The Mycenaean Greek people are thought to be descended from a combination of indigenous population and Indo-European invaders. The civilization developed suddenly around 1600 BCE. Although it was first known only through the accounts of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the existence of Mycenaean civilization was proved by archaeological expedition of Heinrich Schliemann in 1876 at Mycenae in southern Greece. Schliemann and other archaeologists discovered shaft graves, gold and silver jewelry, a palace complex, and other artifacts. Later, Greek legend explains the development of Mycenaean civilizations as being a result of immigration from Phoenicia, or the liberation of Greeks from Minoan tyranny. There is no archaeological evidence to back up these legendary accounts. The evidence does indicate, however, the Mycenaean civilization was influenced by Minoan civilization, and that the Mycenaeans rose to power for profits from trade and piracy. Mycenaean sites share certain common characteristics, including hilltop citadels with thick fortification walls that enclosed palaces and other administrative buildings. Also typical of Mycenaean civilization were luxury-filled tombs for departed rulers, large houses for the aristocracy, and other use of linear B writing. Linear B was the only form of Greek that used symbols to represent syllables. The Mycenaean state controlled the economy, organizing grain, agriculture, and wool production. However, we know little about the Mycenaean political system, religion, society, or other particular historical events. The uniformity that is characteristics of the Mycenaean territory may have been due to some sort of political unity, or it may have been the result of extensive contact and trade. Evidence for long-distance contact and trade includes wall paintings of ships in Egypt and Thera, and excavated remains of ships themselves. Other evidence includes the widespread dispersal of Cretan and Mycenaean pottery and other goods around the Aegean world and in the Middle East. The evidence indicates the Cretan traders came first and were later joined and replaced by the Mycenaeans. In this trade, Crete and Greece exported wine and olive oil, weapons, craft goods, slaves, and mercenaries. They imported amber, ivory, grain, and metals, which were gold, copper, tin. The fine line between trade and piracy can be seen in the strained relations between the Mycenaeans and the Hittites and in the seas of Troy. This is the area that we're talking about right here. All right, so let's look at the Syrian Empire. Background location. Syrian homeland was in northern Mesopotamia. It had more rain and more temperate climate than Sumer or Akkad, but it was exposed to raiders. Assyrian power revived in the 9th century B.C.E., and the Assyrians built an empire expanding along trade routes westward toward the Mediterranean and north to modern Armenia, east to modern Iran, and south to Babylonia. God and king. The Assyrian kings were regarded as the center of the universe, chosen by the gods as their surrogates on earth. Kings had secular and religious duties. Their secular duties of kings included receiving information, hearing the deciding on complaints, and carrying out diplomacy and military leadership. The religious duties of the kings included supervision of the state religion, performance of public and private rituals, and consulting and gaining approval of the gods. Assyrian kings were celebrated in propaganda that was designed to produce feelings of awe and fear in the hearts of their subjects. Such propaganda included the public display of royal inscriptions relating to the conquests and punishments, and artistic renderings of kings as large, muscular, fierce men. And you have conquest and control. At the peak of the Assyrian armies had 500,000 troops divided into functionally specialized units. The Assyrian troops had a variety of military technologies, including iron weapons, cavalry, couriers, signal fires, and spy networks. Assyrian techniques of conquest included terror tactics, mass deportation of civilian populations. Mass deportation served a dual purpose: to destroy the morale of the enemy and to transfer needed laborers to the core area of the empire. The Assyrians found it difficult to control their vast and diverse territory. Their level of control varied, being more effective at the core and less effective at the peripheral parts of the empire. Within the empire, the duties of the Assyrian officials were to collect a tribute and taxes, maintain law and order, raise and provision troops, and construct and maintain public works. The central government included high-ranking officials and professionals. The central government exploited the wealth and resources of the empire for the benefit of the center, but it also invested in provincial and infrastructure, so it was not only parasitic. And then you have the Assyrian society and culture. The Assyrian government did not distinguish between native Assyrians and immigrants. All were considered to have equal rights and responsibilities. The Assyrian economy was based on agriculture, but also included artisans and merchants. In the realm of knowledge and learning, the Assyrians both preserved the knowledge and inherited from older Mesopotamian societies and made original contributions to mathematics and astronomy. The Syrian Empire maintained libraries that were attached to temples in the cities, such as the library of, I'm going to butcher this, the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. This is the area that we're talking about with the Assyrian Empire. So let's look at Israel. The Israelite people were nomadic herders and caravan drivers who developed a complex sedentary agriculture civilization. As they did so, their cult of a desert gold evolved into an influential monotheistic religion. Israel's location makes it a crossroads for trade. However, the area has few natural resources. Origins, exodus, and settlements. Sources for early history of the Israelite people included the Hebrew Bible, which is based in part on oral traditions compiled in the 5th century B.C.E. and archaeological excavations. Biblical accounts of the origins of the Israelite people include the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These stories may be a compressed account of the experience of many generations of nomads. The story of Cain and Abel and the stories of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah reflect the tensions between nomadic Israelite people and settled agriculture people. The biblical account of the Egyptian captivity is not confirmed by Egyptian sources, but may be linked to the rise and fall of the Hyksos rulers of Egypt. The period of Israelite slavery, according to the Bible, corresponds to the period of large-scale construction projects under Sethus I and Ramses II, while biblical account of the Exodus may reflect the memories of the migration of Egypt and nomadic life in Sinai. The cult of Yahweh, with its exclusive devotion to one God, developed into a period of nomadism in Sinai. The biblical account of the Israelite settlement in the land of Canaan says that Joshua led the Israelites into Canaan and to destroy Jericho and other Canaanite cities. Archaeological evidence of what probably happened is that nomadic Israelite tribes settled in the hills of Canaan, where they were joined by other groups and by refugees from a troubled Canaanite society. And you have the rise of the monarchy. Wars with the Philistines brought about the need for strong central government. Saul, the first king, established the Israelite monarchy. David, the second king, completed the transition to monarchy. The Israelite monarchy reached the height of its power in the reign of King Solomon, who forged alliances and sponsored trade. Solomon also expanded the bureaucracy of the army and built the first temple in Jerusalem. The temple priesthood sacrificed to Yahweh received a portion of the agriculture tax and became very wealthy. The wealth and prestige of the temple priesthood was indicative of the increasing gap between the rural and urban, the wealthy and the poor in Israeli society. The Israelite people lived in extended families and practiced arranged marriages. Monogamy was the norm. Men were allowed to have extramarital relations, women were not. In early Israel, women enjoyed relative equality with their husbands in social life, but at the same time, they suffered from certain disadvantages. Women could not inherit property, nor could they initiate divorce. The main occupations of women were bearing and raising children, maintaining the household, and engaging in agriculture and herding. As society became more urbanized, some women began to work outside the home in a variety of occupations. There are some records of women exercising political influence. Examples include the story of Deborah and references to wise women. However, the status of women declined during the period of monarchy. Then you have this fragmentation and dispersal. After Solomon, Israel divided into two kingdoms, the Israel in the north, which had the capital of Samaria, and Judah in the south had the capital of Jerusalem. The two kingdoms were sometimes at peace with each other and sometimes fought. There were some significant religious developments during the period of fragmentation. The concept of monotheism was sharpened, but at the same time, some Israelites were attracted to the worship of Canaanite gods. Political developments during the period of fragmentation include the Assyrian destruction of the northern kingdom, Israel, in 721 BCE, and the fall of the southern kingdom, Judah, to the Babylonian monarch Nebuchadnezzar in 587 BC. Nebuchadnezzar deported a large number of Jewish elites and craftspeople to Babylon. This was the beginning of the Jewish diaspora. During the diaspora, the Jewish people developed institutions to preserve Jewish religion and culture. These developments continued even after some of the Babylonian Jews were permitted to return to Jerusalem. Developments of the diaspora included stronger commitment to monotheism, strict deity or dietary rules, and the veneration of the Sabbath. This is the area that we're talking about with Phoenicia and Israel. All right, so let's look at Phoenicia in the Middle East. Or in the Mediterranean, sorry. All right, the Phoenician city-states. The Phoenicians were the descendants of an ancient inhabitants of Syria, Lebanon, and Israel who were pushed into the strip of land between the mountains and the sea in modern Lebanon about 1100 BCE. There, the Phoenicians established the number of small city-states that were developed and involved in commerce. They were also invented the first alphabetical writing system. The major Phoenician city-states of Byblos, Berytus, Sidon, and Tyre were some of the first major areas. The expansion into the Mediterranean. Phoenician expansion into the Mediterranean was carried out by Tyre beginning in the 9th century BCE. Colonies were established first on Cyprus, then on the North African coast, the south and southeast Spanish coast, Sardinia, Sicily, and Malta. Phoenician expansion into the Mediterranean was the work of a combination of state and private enterprise. Expansion was the response to Assyrian invasions of Syria and Palestine, the shortage of agriculture, land, and Tyre, and opportunities of trade and access and resources. Carthage's commercial empire. The city of Carthage was established on a narrow promontory near the modern Tunis around 814. The walled city was governed by 2 judges selected from upper-class families and by the Senate that dominated by the leading merchant families. The navy was the most important arm of Carthaginian power. Citizens served as rowers and navigators of the fast maneuverable ships. Carthaginian foreign policy and military activity were in the service of trade and were deployed in enforcing a commercial monopoly in the Mediterranean and developing new trading opportunities. Carthaginian merchants were active around the Mediterranean and traded with sub-Saharan Africa along the Atlantic coast of Spain, France, and with Cornwall. Then you have war and religion. The Carthaginians made no attempt to build territorial empire. Their empire was an empire of trade routes and ports. The Carthaginian military was subordinate to the civilian government and consisted of mercenary soldiers commanded by Carthaginian officers. Carthaginian religion involved the worship of capricious gods and needed to be appeased by sacrifice, including the sacrifice of Carthaginian children. The Greeks and Romans thought the Carthaginians were a hard, gloomy people who treated their subjects harshly. This is the area that we're talking about right now. So let's look at the consequences of the Assyrian conquest. The Assyrian conquest brought about the destruction of Israel, deportation of Jewish population of Israel, and pressure on the kingdom of Judah. The Assyrian conquest put pressure on the Phoenicians. Assyrian threats and Assyrian demands for tribute helped spur the Phoenicians to establish colonies in the western Mediterranean. The Assyrian conquest also resulted in the invasion and occupation of Egypt and in Assyrian control over Babylonia and western Iran. As the empire grew, the resources of the Assyrians became overextended, and they had difficulty ruling over a large, ethnically complex territory with subjects and neighbors who had come to hate Assyria. The major sources of resistance to the Syrian Empire were the Neo-Babylonian dynasty of Babylon and the kingdom of Medes and Iran. The Assyrian Empire was destroyed when the Medes captured the Assyrian homeland in northern Mesopotamia and eastern Anatolia. The Neo-Babylonians took over much of the other territory of the Assyrian Empire. All right, guys, if you have any questions, make sure you